Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to approach a realistic eye drawing. In this step-by-step guide, we're going to start from scratch and explore the techniques to create a detailed and lifelike eye. We'll learn how to measure and sketch the basic proportions, build up the shading to create depth, and add those tiny details that bring the eye to life. This tutorial is designed to break down complex concepts into simple, manageable steps, bringing you closer to mastering the art of realistic eye drawing. So let's get started. The first step is to measure the proportions of the eye, so I'm using an HB pencil and sketching lightly to create guides that I will later erase. I'm first drawing a diagonal line that stretches from the inner corner of where the eye will be to the corner of the outer edge of the eyeball. This diagonal line points at a pretty shallow angle between 10 and 20 degrees. Make sure to position the line in the middle of your paper to make an aesthetically pleasing composition. Next, I'm sketching a rough guide for where the outline of the iris will be. Notice where the iris is positioned relative to the diagonal guideline. The diagonal guide intersects the bottom quarter of the circle, and the circle is positioned slightly over towards the left of the line. I've not drawn the top of the circle because the eyelid will cross over that section. When you're happy with the positioning of your guides, draw the pupil. Make sure the pupil is centered in the middle of the iris. I'm still sketching loosely and lightly so that I can easily erase any mistakes. Then we're going to outline the eyelid. Use the edges of the iris and the ends of the line as guides and join the lines up, sketching light curves. I'm also drawing a light line underneath the iris to show where the bottom of the eyelid will go. There is a small gap between the bottom of the iris and the bottom lid. Now I'm continuing to join the lines up from the right hand side of the iris to the outer corner, connecting the circle to the end of the line. Then I'm going to repeat this process for the bottom of the eye, connecting the diagonal guide to the small line I drew to place where the bottom of the eyelid would be. And I'm going to do this on each side. So now we have an outline of the eye. I find that it's easier to achieve a more accurate drawing when you break it up into sections, rather than just approach it all in one go. To create a more comprehensive outline, I'm going to sketch in some of the other details of the eye, so when I come to shade it, I know exactly where everything will go. So I'm adding in the small triangular shape on the side of the eye closest to the nose. The official name for it is the lacrimal caruncle. Then we will need to draw the crease of the bottom eyelid and the crease of the top eyelid. Follow the curve of the eye to draw these accurately. The bottom lid should have a more shallow curve compared to the top lid. So with a finished outline, I'm going to erase the initial diagonal guideline we first made. To start shading the values of the eye, I'm beginning with an HB pencil to map out where the darkest sections will be. I will eventually go over these areas to deepen the darkest areas of the shadow. However, it's best to first start with lighter and midtones in case you need to erase sections later in the drawing process. I'm darkening the contour of the eye so you can see the outline more clearly and establishing some light midtone values to define the shadows of the inner corner of the eye and bottom lid. To give the iris more definition, I'm going to outline where the highlights will appear so that I know to leave this section bare when I come to shade the iris. The reflected light in this eye appears as two rectangular shapes. One appears between the pupil and the top eyelid and the other to the left of the pupil. These reflected light shapes will appear distorted as they curve to the form of the eyeball, so the tops of the reflected rectangles should appear smaller than the bottom. Draw these lightly as you won't need to see the outlines of these shapes in the finished drawing. I'm continuing to map out where the lighter midtones of the drawing will be by lightly shading underneath the eye. The shading doesn't need to be perfect as I will eventually blend this section out to make it look smoother. When drawing realistically, the key is to keep the beginning stages loose, light and open. That way you can keep the edges between features soft and make iterations with ease. One tool that I find particularly useful in lifting midtone values is a kneaded eraser. This will remove graphite from the paper gently without damaging paper fibres. Kneaded erasers can provide a softer appearance when erasing compared to regular rubber erasers. I've linked to a few blog posts about the drawing supplies I use in the description, so if you're interested in artist quality drawing supplies, I explain what you can use to elevate your drawings and how to use them for the best results. I've lifted the midtone values I drew with the kneaded eraser to create separation between the lower lid margin and the skin underneath the bottom lid. The lower lid margin reflects light from the light source, which is coming from slightly above the position of the eye, which makes this area appear brighter than the planes angled away from the light source. Next, I'm going to establish the midtones of the eyeball itself. Establishing midtone values across the whole area creates separation between details, which will enable you to create softer edges and more realistic gradations between shadows and highlights when you come to add in more details. The corners of the eye are darkest, so I'm going to apply a little more pressure in these areas. The white part of the eye, also called the sclera, reflects the most light alongside the lacrimal caruncle. So I'm focusing on shading the area where the white of the eye meets this inner pink triangle. To create seamlessly smooth shading, I'm first shading with an HB pencil, then I blend it out with a paper stump. These stumps are inexpensive to get and you can find them in my list of drawing tools in the blog post linked in the description. However, you could also blend with a cotton cloth, a cotton bud, or your finger. To lift highlights on the eye, I'm lightly erasing with the kneaded eraser to create more contrast in the shading. This process is one of shading, then refining the shaded areas to make the gradient between the dark and the light appear smoother. With blending tools and an eraser, you can work on adding and lifting graphite to create the smooth texture of the eye. I'm doing this first with an HB pencil, then I will work to deepen some of the darkest shadows with a softer pencil. I usually use an 8B for the job. This helps to create more realistic gradients by first establishing the midtones. The next section of the eye that I'm going to work on is the pupil, so I'm quickly shading this with the HB pencil to establish the shape and how it fits around the reflected light rectangle shape. I'm using the tripod grip and controlling the pencil tightly, shading with small circular motions around the edge of the circle to create a hard edge between the pupil and iris. The iris is lighter in value than the pupil, so I'm going to start establishing some of the midtones with this HB pencil, mapping out where the patterns in the iris appear. Because we want this eye to look as realistic as possible, we will include the intricate details of the fibres and the freckles in the iris. It's these details that will really make the drawing stand out. We'll move on to that later, but for now I want to start creating definition in the eye to sketch out the broader tones and value transitions. The outer edges of the circle of the iris are much darker than the middle of the circle closer to the pupil, so I'm going to start by shading some midtone values in this area. When we come to shade over these with darker values with a softer pencil, the midtones will show beneath the shadow details, creating more variety and the illusion of detail. In the middle at the bottom of the iris is a darker patch of melanin, so I'm going to apply more pressure to represent that. Then there are a couple more patches around the outer corner, and a shadow is cast beneath the upper eyelid, so I'm going to sketch that in, then continue to add definition to the iris. I need to shade some of the lighter midtones that surround the eyelid, so I'm applying light pressure and blending with a paper stump. Because the light source is positioned slightly above the eye, the upper eyelid and the inner corner of the eyelid reflect light, so I'm shading these areas with lighter pressure. We're still at the stage of creating the midtones, and I will eventually need to draw the eyelashes with a darker pencil, but in the meantime I find it helpful to sketch out the position of the eyelashes. This way, they're easier to erase if I make a mistake in drawing them the first time, and I can go over them with more confident darker lines with a softer pencil. The eyelashes taper at the end and are thicker at the base. They curve upwards, pointing up and to the right away from the eye. If you're confident in making tapered strokes with your pencil, this is a great opportunity to use that technique. The lashes look fairly organic in terms of their spacing and placement, some cluster together and some are angled slightly differently from the others. Remember, once these outlines are mapped out, you can go over them with more pressure to refine their appearance near the end of the drawing. I'm also going to sketch out where the bottom lashes will be. The bottom lashes are more sparsely placed and not as visible, so I'm going to create the impression of lashes by applying light pressure with an HB pencil around the bottom lid margin. These lashes vary in their directions more so than the top lashes. Start at the inner corner and tape your pencil lines from the lid margin broadly towards the inner corner. As you come to draw the lashes in the middle of the lid, they change direction to point slightly to the right. Some of the lashes clump together and some are spaced out. Again, don't worry if you make a mistake, as you can go over these lines with a softer pencil and apply more pressure when you are certain of their arrangement. Pause the video if you need to and take your time with this stage. The final step of the drawing is deepening the shadow tones to create more contrast. Realistic drawings have a range of values from the brightest highlights to the darkest shadows. So for this stage of the drawing, I'm using an 8B pencil and applying slightly firm pressure at the darkest edges of the iris. The key here is to be patient and work gradually, slowly building up the darkness with layers of graphite. You can skip this step if you like, but I want the iris to look detailed, so I've outlined some pattern shapes that surround the pupil. I drew what's called a pigmented ring, which looks like a squiggly line surrounding the pupil. Then I shaded the section in between this ring and the pupil with individual hatched strokes, that circle around the pupil to give more definition. Because we drew the iris with our initial layer of midtones, those lighter midtone values are showing through, adding more realistic texture to the eye. To increase the contrast in the pigments in the eye and to make it appear hyperrealistic, I'm using this precision eraser to lift some small highlight details in small line shapes that circle around the eye. I've linked the precision eraser I use in the Drawing Tools blog, but you can also use the edge of a regular eraser or a kneaded eraser that you knead into a small point. I'm now establishing the darkest values around the upper lash line and the crease of the top eyelid. You can apply some pressure with a softer pencil to create this. Follow the curvature of the lines you created earlier in the drawing. Then I use a paper stump to blend out the midtones around the upper and bottom lids. With the 8B pencil, I'm going to increase the contrast of the tones on the eyeball, lashes and eyelids. So I'm using the side of my pencil to make broad, even, sweeping marks and increasing the darkness of the shadow areas. I'm blending these tones as I go so that the darker marks from the softer pencil blend into the midtones of the lighter underdrawing. The lashes need to fit with the value range of the drawing, so I'm going over the outlines of the lashes I created earlier with my softer pencil. It's easier to be confidently precise in making these darker marks when following the lighter outlines of the lashes I made as guides. I've also added the shadow of the upper eyelashes that block the light in the reflections in the iris, so I'm using the same method to make those marks darker with my softer pencil. We're nearing the finish of this eye drawing. The only thing left to do is add a few more details and trace over the lower lashes. I'm quite intuitively adding in details here, increasing the shadow in the corner of the eye and the creases of the bottom lid. I'm also blending out some of the shadow tones to create smoother gradients and darkening the outer corner of the eyelid. The bottom lashes are easy to trace over, so I'm doing this as one of the final steps. To finish the drawing, I'm using my precision eraser to lift some reflections in the eye. To make the skin appear more dewy, I'm creating small textures with the eraser on the upper lid and lower lid. Then I want to create some reflections in the corner of the eye itself near to where the tear duct is. These details all contribute to the overall realism of the piece. As you can see, creating a realistic eye drawing takes time, patience and attention to detail, but by breaking down each step and taking your time, you can create a beautiful and lifelike eye drawing that will impress anyone who sees it. It's important to understand that no two eyes are the same and every person's eye has its unique characteristics. So while this tutorial provides a general guide to drawing realistic eyes, don't be afraid to experiment and add your personal touches to make your eye drawing truly one of a kind. Thank you for joining me in this detailed tutorial on drawing a realistic eye. I hope you found it helpful and that it inspires you to create your own stunning eye drawings. If you enjoyed the video and found the tips useful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more art tutorials and drawing tips. Your support helps us continue to produce quality content.